Hello and welcome to the first of our 3 webinars on card sorting. I'm William Hudson and I've shown you my email address here and I'll repeat that later on in the webinar towards the end. It's william.hudson@syntam with a silent G. I won't go into all the details. It seemed like a great name when I chose it out of the dictionary in 1985, but I've since discovered that people don't remember rules of English pronunciation, and they stumble when they get to words they don't recognize. So it is syntam.co.uk, but the G is silent. This session is going to be about preparing paper sorts, and you don't need anything for this except obviously a computer. Most of the stuff we'll be talking about today is Windows based, but a lot of it will work on Macs as well, and Microsoft Word. So today is mostly about how to prepare paper sorts, just like it says on the title there, and you can also use our free SynCaps version 1 software to do the analysis. We're not going to be doing any analysis today. We're not going to be talking about that. We'll be looking at that in session 2 and also session 3. But today you don't need to look at spending loads of money or anything like that. It's about how to do paper sorting, and Part 2, as I mentioned, which will be next week if you're following the live webinars, is all about how to do the analysis, and Part 3 is about the advanced analysis. And we're going to be recording all 3 of these webinars and also posting the slides as PDFs. So you'll be able to find those if you go to www.syncaps.com. I'll show you. That takes you into our Syntam website, and at the moment there are 6 sections there. We are going to be adding a webinar section. It isn't there yet. And this is also where you'll find some of the resources that I talk about today. For example, in particular, the free downloads for the templates. So, for example, the pink link here you'll see, because I've already visited it, takes you to a zip file of all of the Word templates and other documents, the instructions and so forth, that you can download and use. And as I mentioned, mostly for Windows. Some of this will work on Mac versions of Windows, but we do have problems with the barcode fonts. I don't know if you're aware, Microsoft and Apple argued for years about font technology, and for whatever reason the barcode fonts that we use in the templates, if you're interested in trying to speed up data capture through barcodes, just don't work in the Macintosh versions of Word, unfortunately. But you don't have to use barcodes. A lot of this can be done with just straightforward keyboard entry as well, and for that the Mac versions are perfectly satisfactory too. Just a word about resources before we start. There are a number of articles that I've written. The first one, I'm embarrassed to say, Interactions article, Playing Your Cards Right. I wrote for Interactions magazine. I used to have a column in the ACM Interactions magazine. And I've only discovered this morning that is not on our website. I wrote it 8 years ago, 2005, and it's been in the ACM Digital Library all these years, but it's not been freely available. So we've put that right as of today. So if you go to our articles page, you'll see under columns and other articles in Interactions magazine, you'll see this article called Playing Your Cards Right. And it's a fairly lengthy article. It goes into lots of detail about some of the more advanced things we're going to be talking about later on in the series, but it's also a good grounding in the basics of card sorting and the approach that I use. There is also the somewhat more detailed article, which has been, whoops, sorry about that, freely available in the Interaction Design Encyclopedia. This is more recent. I wrote this last year. It's about 7,000 words, so it's fairly lengthy and a little bit more up to date, although slightly different in what it's discussing and the emphasis. But that's of there if you'd like to have a look at it too for free. We have a whole number of presentations and videos, and as I mentioned already, free software and downloads at the syncaps.com address. And by the way, SynCaps, CAPS itself, as I explained in the very next entry, stands for Computer-Aided Paper Sorting. And SynCaps is just the name I've given to the software, Syntam's Computer-Aided Paper Sorting Analysis Package. And we have 4 videos on YouTube currently about doing paper sorting with the cards that we're going to be looking at. And you just have to go to YouTube and search on CAPS card sorting, or just visit, again, our website, the syncaps.com, or follow this link here, and you'll see the four videos there. They're fairly short. They're only about 10 or 15 minutes each, and you might find them helpful. Other resources, well, I'll be running my usual card sorting course at the CHI conference, and CHI this year is in Paris, so if you're a European participant in the webinar, then you might find that of interest. All the details will be on the chi2013.acm.org site. We'll be publishing the course schedule next week, in fact. And the one great thing about the courses at CHI is that they're fairly inexpensive. They're much lower cost than the typical commercial course. And the other course that we have, we ran a whole series of 90-minute webinars called Guerrilla UCD, of which there are 16 in total. And webinar number 7 is about card sorting. So if you're interested, you could visit www.guerrilaucd.com. But that's just to give you other things to look at and some background to the whole thing. Today we're not going to be going a lot into some of the theory. Today's very much more practical. In fact, these first 2 sessions are predominantly practical. I'm not going to explain to you how for example, cluster analysis works, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how you choose the things to put in your card sort. I will be giving you some guidance on that. So it's in the hour that we have, it's going to be a lot more about the practice or the mechanics of getting card sorts prepared for use by participants. And the first half hour or so, 35 minutes, will be me talking about or talking to the prepared presentation. Then I'm going to do a 10 or 15 minute demonstration of how to do this stuff with Microsoft Word mail merge. And for that, you don't have to use our templates. You can make it up as you go along, and I'll show you how you do that. But our templates do give you a nice, somewhat easier starting point, as you'll see when we get to that stage. And then hopefully we'll have time for about 10 minutes worth of questions at the end. I can also take questions during the webinar, as mentioned on this slide. If you're watching the webinar live, then you'll find that you have in the GoToWebinar interface, you have the ability to type questions in, so please do that as they occur to you. I've got some time built into the presentation part to take questions, but if the question can wait, if it's a general question, if it can wait till the end of the session, that might be a little bit fairer on people who just want to get through the main presentation. I know people are always very interested in their own questions, but people are also remarkably uninterested, it seems, in other people's questions, I've discovered in all these years of teaching. So if it's a longer question or a more general question, please keep it till the end. But certainly happy to take questions throughout the early part of the session as well. Also, just finally to mention, if you've got questions that you'd like to have a more general discussion about, we do have an email list / discussion group that you can subscribe to by sending an empty email to caps-subscribe@mailman.syntam.co.uk. And those of you who are already subscribed to that list may be somewhat surprised to discover that it's a discussion list. That's how I set it up about 7 or 8 years ago, but I think there have been no questions on it for quite some time. So it is actually a discussion list. If you want to ask questions on that list, please feel free. Or if you'd rather ask me a personal question about card sorting, then my email address is, as I mentioned, william.hudson@syntam.co.uk. Today's topics, well, we're going to be talking generally about the benefits of card sorting and particularly the benefits of paper sorting. I think paper sorting really is somewhat underused and underrated, and I think possibly because it's actually a lot harder work to set up than an online sort. But I think there are lots of benefits that more than justify the effort in getting a paper card sort or a face-to-face card sort organized. We are going to be briefly discussing open versus closed sorts and something in between that I call a hybrid sort, and also the issue of what I refer to as ad hoc items. These are items that people make up as they're going along, your participants make up, and how you can use those and how you can actually include those in the analysis as well. We will be looking at the basic ingredients. Every card sort has as its core the items you want sorted, and then depending on whether it's an open sort or a closed sort, etc., you have groups as well that need to be possibly pre-printed, and just a mechanical thing, the participant cards that separate each participant's sort results. I'll be talking about how to use Microsoft Word for doing what Microsoft refers to as a mail merge, but is just basically putting lists of items into a template and producing those as individual cards or labels. And I'll be talking about the practical issues of printing those. And then finally looking at a couple of advanced topics that I talk about in both the interactions article I mentioned, the one called Playing Your Cards Right, and also in the Interaction Design Encyclopedia article, something that I refer to of quality of fit, which is where we allow participants to say how well each item fits in the group they've placed it, which has some benefits we'll talk about later on, and also a fairly new facility. As far as I'm aware, no other analysis software accommodates this as yet, but that's just the fairly basic idea of nested groups, being able to allow people to define a hierarchy of items rather than just the single level that we've always been catering for in card sorting up till now. So we're just going to start by talking about some of the design issues that card sorting is really addressing. And one of the very first papers that I came across years ago when I became interested or started working in card sorting, probably about 10 years ago now, was a really interesting paper put together by a group of automotive researchers, and they were trying to work out a good way of finding out how things should be organized in a car cockpit. Now here we have a fairly recent Prius, and you can see just by looking around this that there are dozens, scores, or maybe even hundreds of individual bits of information and controls that need to be organized. And of course the idea of letting drivers or passengers or both determine where things are just by grouping them together with cards is quite appealing. And of course one of the challenges of design, and card sorting is quite a good solution to that. Unfortunately the paper's no longer around. Certainly I can't find it when I look on the web, and it, as I say, might have been the late 1990s or early 2000s when I saw it, and I did not keep a copy of it. But it was a very interesting application of card sorting. And of course we have the general issue in all kinds of walks of life about how things should be organized, and here's a fairly common example of how supermarkets ought to be organized. And of course you can move this very easily to online environments, how supermarket websites, online shopping sites ought to be organized, and so forth. So it's all about how people think about a problem domain, what kind of terminology they use, how they would consider things to be closely related, how they would consider things to be not at all related, and that's really what we're trying to address with card sorting. And of course card sorting can solve all of these problems. not really, but it certainly can help to solve all of these problems, which is a slightly different thing. But it's I think it's really quite a powerful tool, and as I mentioned, certainly on the face-to-face or paper sorting side, not as well used as it could or ought to be. So some of the main benefits of card sorting in general is that compared to, say, for example, usability testing, which is sort of the gold standard for user experience, really, card sorting can be, or certainly is, much more cost-effective for large numbers of items. If you consider a typical usability session with a participant of being between 40 minutes and an hour, you really are only going to be able to address a handful of different navigational items. It's just not conceivable or practical to sit down and walk users through dozens or scores of individual navigational items, and that is exactly the kind of thing that we do in card sorting. And it's not exactly equivalent, I hasten to add. We're not pretending that card sorting is the same as usability testing, but it certainly is a good way and can give you very good feedback. And of course, one of the real attractions, I think, of card sorting as an overall technique is that it can be both qualitative and quantitative. So on the qualitative side, certainly in research, particularly in novel problem areas, we can use card sorting to really explore the problem area, to find out about users' terminology, the concepts, how everything hangs together, which things should be related, which things are not at all related. And we can use card sorting as an excuse or as a tool to really explore our participants' thinking in a particular problem domain. So qualitative, small numbers, typically one-to-one sessions using paper cards, and you can start with blank cards. There's no reason why not to. Certainly if it was as you might refer to as a green field problem, you don't really know much or anything about it, then you could start with a handful of things that you already know about, or you could start with blank cards, what I've been referring to or referred to briefly as ad hoc items, and invite participants to make up these terms and to tell you how they should be organized as you're going along. Now that's primarily qualitative. You may not actually be interested in the quantitative analysis of that at all, but with some of the tools that I'll be talking about today, you could also do a quantitative analysis of those kinds of results. On the quantitative side, typically we're more interested in how a reasonable number of people group sets of items together. And you may have seen or you may know about some research that Tom Tullis and a colleague did that Jacob Nielsen improved on or modified to suggest that you can get away with about 15 participants in a face-to-face kind of session. Now, what I've discovered myself is that it really does depend very much on how much agreement there is between participants on what constitutes closely related items, and that for some things 15 participants may be too many, or certainly more than what was needed. And in other cases, you might discover that 100 participants are not going to help you because people just aren't agreed on what kinds of relationships should exist. And this is why, and I'll mention this a few times during the session, this is why I am increasingly finding that a completely open sort, where we allow people to define their own groups and concepts, labels for groups and so forth, is possibly not nearly as helpful as a hybrid sort, where we provide people with a little bit of a framework, maybe a suggestion of how they might do it, and if they don't like it, they can change it, but at least it gives them an idea of what kind of solution that you're looking for. And although we're going to be talking primarily about card sorting with a view to researching navigation, as I mentioned with the automotive example, card sorting can also be used for layout. So you can ask people how they would organize things on a form or on a screen, and of course you can then find out what kind of solution you've got from this collection of participants and use that to inform your layout of whatever kind of information you're presenting. The different main approaches are paper-based, or what you might refer to more generically as face-to-face, but we end up using paper in those kinds of situations. It's possible to do a face-to-face sort with an online system, but really you end up throwing away a lot of the advantage of a face-to-face sort, and that is the flexibility, the ability to make up ad hoc items and give good qualitative feedback. The qualitative feedback is possible, but it would actually have to be taken down by the researcher rather than through the card sorting, online card sorting website, for example. Typically do not allow comments on a per item basis. They only allow comments for the whole experience. The other type of excuse me, approach I've referred to fairly generically here as virtual cards sorted on screen. And the reason I say that is that these days they are primarily online through websites, but there are still a number of desktop applications that let you do this. But I have to say that I have yet to see a desktop application that I would like to sit an inexperienced user in front of and say, here, sort these. They all seem to have rather convoluted or awkward user interfaces. And of course, for some problem domains, having even a web-based online sorting solution could be taxing for participants. It does depend a lot on the problem domain and the kind of participants you're talking about. The scope of sorts, I've already hinted at this. Open sorts, if it's completely open, participants make up their own groups and name them, and you may also allow them to make up their own items. And as I mentioned already, if it was entirely open, what you might refer to as a naked sort, you could actually start with blank cards and just say, well, what are the main concepts in this problem domain? How do you go about addressing these issues? What do you call things? How are they related? A closed sort at the other extreme is that where you provide all the groups and their names. You might allow people to change in a face-to-face sort. You might allow people to change group names. Regrettably, I don't believe this is possible in most online solutions. They would just have to make up a new group if you were allowing them to do that. And the hybrid sorts, both online solutions and face-to-face solutions support this, where you provide some groups and allow people to add to that list. Most of the online solutions that I'm aware of do now allow this. Some of them used to be a little bit more restrictive in this respect, but happily that's no longer the case. At least one of the online solutions that I know of, it used to be called WebSort. It's part of UX Punk now, allowed you to upload photographs and let users sort those. So clearly that has an advantage in that you don't have to give things names if you feel that that's actually part of the research exercise. And of course, if you're doing face-to-face sorting, you can sort anything. You could sort photographs, you could sort, as I show here, fabric swatches or building materials or objects. All you have to be able to do when it comes to doing the data collection is to identify the things that the people have sorted, so you can know how to show them in the analysis. So all kinds of possibilities with a paper-based or face-to-face sessions. Here's an example of the kind of item card or item label in this case that we're going to be looking at producing in Microsoft Word. As I mentioned already, the barcodes are just there to help with data collection. You don't have to use them. The data format that our software uses, if you want to use any version of that, the free version or the paid-for versions, is very straightforward. So it is very simple to sit down and just type the data in using the item numbers, for example, on here. But if you have a lot of this to do, or if you do card sorting on a fairly regular basis, a barcode reader can make this very quick indeed. It's not at all difficult to do to barcode scan 2 items a second. If you were being particularly quick, you might get it up to 3 with a bit of practice anyway. This example is one that I talk about in the Playing Your Cards Right article. It's a wine example that I've used quite a few times. It's just very, very simple. And these are item cards, and these would be printed, this particular example would be printed onto labels of corresponding size, and you would then get your participants to fasten these onto index cards of some sort. These are the perforated cards that we use, 4 to a sheet, and we provide templates for these either in European ISO A4 size, so you get 4 A6 cards to a sheet, or US letter size 4 to a sheet. And the main components on here are the item name at the top, and that's always there. And then if you need some additional missing context because you've taken an item out of say a navigation hierarchy and it's not self-explanatory, then you might provide that information here. I hardly ever do this. I've been doing this now for at least 10 years, and I've only done that 2 or 3 times. What's more common, however, is to list alternative terms. If you've discovered in your user research that there are different names for something, then you could list all those different names and just ask people which name they prefer. And unfortunately, that doesn't actually get entered into the analysis. But it's something that you can make note of when you're going through doing the data capture to say that people preferred this name on so many occasions. And I think the very first card sorting project I was involved in, we discovered that this financial, I think it was a shares site, was using a term which was actually fairly unusual, and that several other sites which did very much the same thing used a completely different term, and that came out in the analysis. People said, well, this term is unusual, it really ought to be called this, and so we were able to recommend that to the customer at the conclusion, as well as advice about how these things ought to be organized within the site. The photo on the right here is showing a workshop I was running in Spain a few years ago. So these are students who are organizing the cards. And you can see that in this particular image that here are the sheets as they start off for perforated cards. And all the participants have to do is just bend these slightly down the perforations and then pull them apart to get the A6 cards. In the face-to-face approaches, you've got different configurations of participants and researcher. The most straightforward, the most direct for certain, is what I've referred to here as one-to-one. So there's you and the participant. And that's really excellent for qualitative research. So if you're trying to really find out a lot about this problem domain, then that's a really good way of doing it. And it allows you to investigate the in-depth understanding of similarities and differences, and you can ask people about why they've put these items together and why they've put these in separate groups and what the dimensions of their choices were and so forth. 2-to-1, you can have 2 participants doing a joint sort and ask them to keep notes about what they discussed and what they may have disagreed on and how they arrived at the solutions, and that can be very informative because it gets a lot more of the thinking out in the air, and either you could take the notes or you could ask one of the participants to take the notes, and you could then make follow-up inquiries. And then finally, many-to-one, which I've done, I guess, most frequently, typically with a room of maybe 5 to 8 people, each doing their own sorts, So you brief them, you let them do their sorting, and then if you need to or would like to, you can run a quick focus group session afterwards. And that's shown in this next image. These very happy-looking people are struggling over a big chunk of their corporate intranet, and a lot of the items on their intranet are on these cards, and they're trying to work out how they think it should be organized. The real benefit of paper sorting, I think, over online sorting is that you're there. The facilitator is present. You can deal with questions. You can deal with confused participants. You can also steer participants to solutions that are more helpful to your design project. Okay, this isn't cheating. You know, you have a goal. You've got to actually build a technological solution of some sort. And for people to sit down and start talking about what they particularly need in terms of, well, I don't use these, so I don't care where they go, and so forth, which we do get a lot of, very kind of self-centered approaches to sorting really don't contribute much to a more generic solution. So you might actually see somebody doing that, and you might say, well, can you think about it from your colleagues' perspective? You know, how will people find, in general, how will people find this material? So you can see that going on, and you can address that. The sorts can be much more open, as I mentioned. You can get people to make up what they might consider to be missing items, and of course you're there to ask more interesting questions, to get much more detailed feedback. So compared to setting up an online sort and just, as it were, let it rip, it's a much more involved and much higher quality qualitative solution. As far as what you're doing in a paper sort, you can sort anything, as I mentioned. You just need to put a label on it, and of course it's a lot less intimidating. If you ask people to sort things on a table or pieces of card, they're not going to be worried about understanding the technology. You know, typically it's a stack of cards and a pen or a pencil, and people just don't tend to worry about that very much relative to being asked to perform this kind of operation online. I'm not going to go too much into terminology. As I mentioned, you can find out a lot about that in the resources I set out at the start of the presentation. But one thing I will mention is this issue of superficial matches, especially if you've got an existing, say, website or intranet, and you take a lot of the navigation items out of that. You may well find that you've got things like manage absence and holidays. These came from a real intranet, by the way. Manage absence and holidays, manage difficult colleagues, change management. Well, people, especially when they're faced with a lot of items to sort, and in particular in an online sort, people start to do things very superficially, or can do things very superficially. So they start grouping things with similar words together, you know, manage. So you end up with a whole bunch of things which are all grouped under manage, but they're all completely different things that really ought to be in different places in the intranet. So you need to consider whether this is helpful or useful to you, or whether this is how you really want things to go. Should people really go to the manage section? I think not in most cases. So you may well need to use synonyms or omit unnecessary words to get down to the meaning of the item. So instead of manage absence and holidays, we just make that absence and holidays. Instead of managing difficult colleagues, we make that coping with difficult colleagues. Instead of change management is the only place where the manage actually has to stay. So in this particular example, I've left that alone. I mentioned already ad hoc sorts. This is something you can't do typically with online packages. It's just not something that has been addressed. There's no real technological impediment. But generally speaking, you have to define all of your items at the outset, and you're not allowed to add other items. So if you're trying to find out whether you've covered everything by inviting users or participants to add missing items or things that they think ought to be there. You just can't do that with most online solutions. You can with paper-based solutions, and depending on what analysis package you're using, it's either handled automatically or it's handled with a bit of legwork by you. If you're using the free version of SynCaps, SynCaps V1, you will have to go back and assign item numbers to those new things and use that when you're doing the data capture. For SynCaps version 2 and the upcoming SynCaps version 3, you can just type the new items in as you're going along. So basically anything that somebody's written on a card, if you want to capture that, you have to key it in rather than relying on a barcode. That will actually just become part of the analysis. And if various people have used exactly the same terminology, then those will be lumped together. Or if you notice when you're doing the analysis that there are various variations in subtle variations in wording or in spelling, you can actually lump those together in the analysis. We'll talk about that next time. And most of these solutions, both online and paper, will allow people to create new groups. You do have the choice on online solutions to say whether or not you want to allow that. And as I mentioned already, some solutions used to be rather stern about, you either have no groups predefined, or you have, and people have to make them up, or you have all the groups predefined and people can't make them up. But I think now a little bit more flexible. The basic ingredients to any card sort are participant cards, and these, as I mentioned, are just required for the mechanics of knowing where one participant stops and the next one starts. Item cards are the only thing you generally have to have as pre-printed, unless it's a completely open sort where you're starting from scratch with blank cards. And as we've seen, you can use barcodes to make the data collection a bit quicker. If you're using address labels or something like that, then you would ask your participants to peel these off and apply them to something like index cards. It is possible in North America to buy computer printable Post-it notes, but to me there seems to be no real advantage in using Post-it notes particularly in a setting with 5 or 6 people, because there usually isn't enough wall space, whereas you can get something like a boardroom table. And then when you come to do the data analysis, the data collection, having the notes stuck together is actually a positive problem, that you have to peel them apart to do the analysis, whereas with the cards you just stack them up and put a rubber band around them, and they're very quick to analyze when you're finished. One thing I will mention is that do supply group cards to people for the groups that you know you need, or that you've already decided that you're going to have. So this is more of a hybrid sort than an open sort. And don't forget to give people places to put things like that you might refer to as meta items. So you might give them a group called page header or page footer or help section, or things where you know that they're going to have trouble working out where to put this, so they're not going to have an easy place to put these things. So give them that help to just make it easier, a little bit more obvious to them. Now, I'm going to, in about 5 minutes, do a demonstration of the Microsoft Word mail merge, but I should just mention there are instructions for doing this. I'll show them to you at the beginning of the demonstration in the free download that we provide. So what we now call the combined download has got in it instructions, card sorting templates, and also some sample data, and they cover most of the Microsoft Word mail merge features that we're going to be using in a little while. As I mentioned, item cards, normally you end up printing these for any sort, and you might end up printing group and participant cards. You can use empty blank cards for this. Certainly if you're doing an completely open sort, then you would invite people to write group names on the cards, and you only need 1 participant card per participant, so you can do that however you like. Generally speaking, particularly these days, most offices have laser printers and you print onto light card. It's a bit easier to handle. If you don't want to use light card or your printer is a bit limited in that respect, you could do it onto paper, but possibly not as easy from a participant point of view. Address labels are a good alternative. They're very cheap. You can get lots on a sheet, and you just get your participants to stick them onto 3 by 5 inch index cards, or in Europe, A6 size approximately postcards. And you can use other technologies. Certainly people have successfully used inkjet printers, for example. It's just that you should check that it works with your barcode scanner. You may find, I know this has happened in the past, that the barcodes need to be a little bit larger, and you can certainly go into the templates and increase the font size of the barcodes if you find that they're not working very reliably from your inkjet. Alternatively, if it's only happening occasionally, you can just key the data in as you're going along. So you could do 90% of your data through barcodes, and then some of it you'd have to key in because the barcode wasn't scannable for some reason. I'm just going to talk about a couple of advanced topics. And again, I mentioned this first one, quality of fit, in the articles both from the Interactions magazine and also on the Interaction Design Encyclopedia. I call it quality of fit, and it's something that I have participants do as a second pass when they're doing paper sorting. They go through and sort the cards, and then I say, go back and mark how well each card fits into the group you've placed it. And this has an advantage that it's like having a lot more participants in the room, is really the bottom line, that people are able to be much more subtle in the way that they express where things go. So I think it's very helpful from that point of view. And a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Caroline Jarrett, actually adapted this to a slightly different purpose. She used the same weighting scheme to address frequency of use. So she asked her participants to mark how often they use this particular item on this website or on this intranet. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a second. The other advanced topic, this is brand new for SynCaps version 3, and I'll talk a lot more about this in the third webinar, but we introduce nested groups, and you can have a hierarchy up to 9 levels deep, although I certainly wouldn't recommend that for most purposes because it would melt the brains of your participants, but that is possible, and we'll look at how that works very briefly now and in a lot more detail in session 3. Here is an example. I showed you something like this earlier, one of our A6 cards or postcard size cards from US letter stock, and down the right hand side we have the quality of fit. That should say fit at the top, not use. I just realized there's a typographical error there. And they would mark, well, this fits perfectly in the group I've put it in, so I'm very happy with that. Middling is, well, this is a good fit, it's not great, but it'll do. And then they would tick fair if they've put it here because it's really the only place it can go, but they're not terribly happy about that. And it actually works very well with closed card sorts. So you've actually given people all the groups and they've put something in this group but they're really not very happy about it, so they would mark it as fair. But even when people have made up their own groups, you'll find that they acknowledge that this scheme doesn't work very well for this particular item or for this set of items, so they just mark the fair box. And what happens in the analysis is that these get weighted according to perfect, good, or fair, and that determines the strength of the relationships in the cluster analysis. We'll be talking more about that in session 2. Here is the very similar card, but now the heading is correctly use, and this is using the same weighting scheme, but now it's labeled often, sometimes, and rarely. So here we would actually be affecting the cluster analysis by how often people use things, as opposed to how well they thought it fits. And certainly Caroline, when she was using this, found it very helpful in the situations she was addressing. So quality of fit's helpful when you have a small number of participants, and as I said already, it allows them to express their intentions more subtly. And you do this as a second pass after the sorting. So you get everybody to sort their cards, and then you ask them to go back through and mark these, tick a box on each card. The frequency of use is slightly different. I think it helps to engage people more with the words on the cards, which is actually very useful. But of course, you would probably do this before sorting. You could do it afterwards. It really doesn't matter very much. Regrettably, you can't do both. You have to choose how you want to use the weights on the cards, the weight of 3, 2, or 1. And there is only one weight, so you can't have both. And what I haven't mentioned is that we do have templates, and it's perfectly possible to not use either of these schemes. You can just have much smaller cards or leave that space empty for whatever reason. Nested groups I mentioned. I'll talk more about this in session 3 in particular. SynCaps version 2 supports already something called anonymous subgroups, where you can just say, this is a subgroup. It's different, but I'm not going to give it a name. You can't give it a name. It's just the nature of the analysis. But SynCaps version 3 introduces nested groups up to 9 levels. And you could either ask your participants to assign these levels, or you as the researcher or facilitator could simply ask them to lay them out geometrically on the table and assign the groups as you pick them up. So you could say, well, these are level 1, these are level 2. And you would do that either by using these pre-printed cards we've got here, which only go to 4 levels, which I think is probably the most humane approach. But you can go up to 9 levels, so either you could, we could adjust this to include more levels, or you can simply ask people to write the level numbers on the card, and you would key those in when you're doing the data collection. The way that the weighting works with the nested groups is that items that appear together in the same groups get the heaviest weighting. Items that appear in child groups below the first item are given a slightly lower weight. And then items which have no common parent, they're in completely separate branches of the family effectively, have no score at all, a 0 score, so they're unrelated. And as well as the weighting on the cluster analysis, you get a new chart in version 3 of SynCaps, a groups by groups chart that shows how the groups were nested. So I'll stop here. Think about asking questions if you'd like to. As I mentioned, you do that through the GoToWebinar interface. So if you're watching the live webinar, if you're looking at the recording, then you have no choice but to email me, and there's my email address again, william.hudson@syntam with a silent g.co.uk. And I'm also going to leave, and I'll come back to this, a couple of commercial messages for you to consider. If you're an existing SynCaps user and you'd like to beta test SynCaps version 3 during February, so just starting in a couple of weeks probably, then do please get in touch and let me know. And also my new book is out today. It's appeared on Amazon.com already. It's hopefully going to be on Amazon.co.uk. And it's called Lighting the Road Ahead. Bill Gates wrote a book in 1995 called The Road Ahead, which was all about the future. And I've improved on that title by calling it Lighting the Road Ahead, which is actually all about usability, accessibility, and search engine optimization. So have a look at that at www.lightingtheroadahead.com. But what I'll do just now is show you how this all works in practice. So what I've done is I've downloaded our combined zip file, which gets you these 3 folders: instructions, sample data, and templates. And I'll just quickly show you in the instructions folder that we have instruction for producing cards. And here is what that looks like. And you'll see that it only talks about SynCaps versions 1 and 2. And we'll update this when we release version 3, but these instructions probably will not change very much because it's all about how to print the cards using Microsoft Mail Merge. And what I'll show you if I just drag down here, this actually includes instructions for the older versions of Microsoft Word. So this top bar here is from Microsoft Office 2003, whereas the bottom bar here is the one we'll be looking at now. That's from Office 2007 and Office 2010. So that's what we're just about to have a look at. But all of these instructions are here. But just to prevent you having to read through all of those just to get started, I'll show you how this works in practice. So I'm going to go back to my desktop. This is the wonderful Windows version 8, which causes some great fun from time to time. I'm going to show you my very simple list of items. Now, I deliberately made this fairly short. It's just a list of fruit and veg from one of my examples. And here I've turned on the line numbering in Word. So I know that there are 22 items here, and the line numbers aren't part of the text. And you can do this in Word just by going to Page Layout and clicking on Line Numbers if you want line numbering. So that's what I've done. So I know there are 22 of these. So that's my starting point. You might have your items in, I'm just going to get rid of this text for the time being. You might have your items in a spreadsheet or in an email. It really doesn't matter where they come from. I'm going to look in the templates folder. Now, in the templates folder, we've split things up by the paper size you're using. So if you're in Europe, then you've got ISO A4 probably. And if you're in the US, then you have letter size. So I'm going to go for ISO A4. And you'll see that we have a number of different kinds of files. And they really correspond, not surprisingly, to the main components of a sort. We've got item cards, we've got group cards, and we've got participant cards. I'm just going to show you item cards as an example because they're the ones that you do most frequently. And for each of these you have something called a master, and this is the terminology that Microsoft Word uses. So when you're doing mail merge, you have a mail merge master, and then you have a data file, which can be almost anything in Windows, by the way. It can be another Word document. That's what I'm going to show you. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be an Access database. It can be a SQL database. All kinds of things are possible. It only has to be understandable by Microsoft Word, which is fairly generous in terms of what you can actually provide it. I'm going to look at the item A4 master, and just to show you that it's possible, I'm going to click on the no-fit version. So you'll always get these two really difficult to understand messages, and it doesn't really matter how you answer these at this point. Basically, the master is connected to a data source, and it's asking you whether you want to reconnect it. The data source is actually almost never in the right place because it remembers exactly where they were on the machine that the file was saved on. So this will be on my machine. And in fact, it isn't even right for the account I'm using. So I'm just going to say no. It doesn't really matter how you answer that. So this is what the master looks like. And this information up here actually isn't in the master file. It's actually in the connected data file. And the first thing that we need to do is to join it up to our data file. And we do that in the mailings ribbon. So here's the mail merge ribbon called mailings in the later versions of Microsoft Word. We ignore these first couple of items, the create group. That really doesn't do anything for us. What we want to do is go straight to select recipients. And here you want to choose your existing data source. So use existing list, and you have to always navigate to where you've stored your list of items. Now let me show you. I'm going to go to, I put it on my desktop so to make it easy, so I'm just trying to remember. I'm going to go into templates, which is where all of the empty files or the starting files come from. And here if I'm doing items, I want to click on one of these item data sources. And I'll just use the doc version because that's a little bit more convenient. So I've opened that up, and now we can change what we get here. It's a bit frightening, I admit, in this form, but if you click on the preview results, you see what's currently in that data file, which is just all of these notes, and the suggestions are that you delete this. So let's open up that data file separately, and I'll do that by going back to the desktop, going into templates, and clicking on that folder again, and this time clicking itemdata.doc. And what will happen is it'll actually open up now the data file separately. So this is the data file. This is where the item names go. And this is where some of the other additional stuff goes. Now we don't really want any of this that's in here already. So what we'll do is select it and delete it. I'll then find my actual list of items, which is here. I'll select everything here. That was Control A to do that, Control C to copy it. And I'm just going to show you the wrong way first. The wrong way is to just click in the cell and go Control V for paste. And you'll notice what it's done is to actually paste all 22 items into the first row, which is not what we want. So what you actually have to do is select the appropriate number of rows. And this is just the way that tables work in a lot of places in Microsoft Office. So I've now selected 22 rows, which is, as I know, how many items I've got. I'll hit Control V, and lo and behold, they're now in separate rows, which is exactly what we're after. As I mentioned, if we wanted to, we could be putting things in the description or the alternatives part, like, for example, courgettes I've also put, which is the European name for what Americans often refer to as zucchini. I will put, or certainly it's the English name, it's actually French originally. I could put that over here as an alternative, and we'll see that it actually turns up on the card that way. Similarly with calabrese, which is not a word you hear very often these days, but it used to be a very popular alternative to broccoli. So I'll put that over there just to show you how that differs. And if we now go back to our master template, we'll see that the first 4 items actually do appear here. Now notice that in the template there are only the 4 items on the first sheet. If we want to go through and see what the other items are, we would actually press this preview results forward button, and we can see all the different items. Now some people don't understand because it's confusing. I have no hesitation in confessing that you can't just print this sheet. You'll only get the first 4 items. What you actually have to do is click on the Finish and Merge item, and then click on Edit Individual Documents. And what this actually does is to create a new document which has all of your cards in it. So let's just do that. Now one thing I wanted to show you here is that now we've got all of my cards, but we also have all the cards I didn't use. So notice we went up to 22. 23 and 24 are blank, so that might be fair enough to have a couple of spare blank cards. But what you'll notice is that you have blank cards up to 100, because that is how many items were pre-numbered in the list. So you've got 2 choices. One choice is to actually delete all of the empty rows in the item data document. Or when you did the mail merge, you had the choice, you may not have noticed it, of saying which documents you wanted to merge. So again, I'm going to do Edit Individual Documents, and instead of saying all, I could just say from 1 to, I may as well do 24, because you're going to print a full sheet anyway, so we'll get a couple of blank cards at the end. And now, if you notice, we go down here and we will stop at 24, and we haven't wasted 75 cards. Now the thing is, these fonts, these barcode fonts, if you're interested in them, are embedded in the templates, and they're absolutely fine for printing from this point. What they're not fine for is saving. If you try to save this file as a Word document, Word will recognize that this is a new generation of this document and will not allow you to save the barcodes. So the way to do that is to print this, if you want to keep them as a document, either by doing a save as Adobe PDF, or if you've got Adobe Acrobat installed, or you can print to Adobe PDF, which is more or less the same, but again you need Adobe Acrobat, or in all recent versions of Microsoft Office and Windows, you get something called the Microsoft XPS Document Writer, and all that does is to create a file with your print images in it. So if you wanted to create this for printing elsewhere or at another time, then save it to either Adobe Acrobat or XPS Document Writer format, and you'll be able to keep that file with the barcodes in it for later use or for printing by a third party if you want to get a third-party printer to do it, for example. So that's what I wanted to show you in the way of Microsoft Mail Merge. As I mentioned already, you can do your own thing completely. Again, you ignore this create part of the mailings ribbon. This is for creating envelopes and labels with the same information repeated on each and every one of them. What you want to do is start with Start Mail Merge and choose labels. And when you do that, you can then say what kind of labels. And some of these could be labels and some of them could just be sheets of paper. They don't actually have to be physically labels. So for example, here is by default under Microsoft is a half a US letter. So you would get 2 to a sheet. Here's a quarter of US letters. So that's one way of getting 4 to a sheet and so forth. But I'm not going to go into that now. That's just to say you can do anything you like, but we've provided templates for doing it this particular way. So I'd be happy to answer questions at this point. Again, if you're watching the live webinar, you've got an interface for doing that. If you're watching the recording, then you will need to email me at william.hudson@syntam.co.uk. I'll wait for a few moments to see if anyone is going to be brave enough to ask a question. I'll also let you have a look at my commercial messages whilst we're doing that. So if you're interested in nested groups, or a lot of the other features we're adding in version 3, which is to do with participant analysis and getting rid of some of the participants, for example, who didn't really understand what they were doing or who did things in a very different way from everyone else, or to identify whether you've got multiple user communities who did the sorting in different ways, then you might well be interested in SynCaps version 3, and being part of the beta test would be an exciting way of getting started with that. So do let me know. You don't have to decide now. There is a question. Let us see what we have. Yes, the material will be shared somewhere. If you go to www.syncaps, S-Y-N-C-A-P-S, probably tomorrow, okay, sometime during Friday, then you will find a webinar page, and I will put the slides and the recording from this webinar there, and then for the subsequent webinars I will add the slides and recordings as we go along. So www.syncaps.com takes you into the Syntam website at the right place, and just look for the not as yet created webinars page. If you do go to that address now, you'll find out that that's where all the other information is. That's where the videos are that I did some years ago. That's where the instructions and downloads are, and so forth. So a few people have asked me that question, and that's the answer. Any questions about any of the topics of the webinar? If not, we really have run out of time, so I will thank you very much for listening. Hope to have you on the subsequent webinars, and so I'll say goodbye. Goodbye.